12 minutes, counting down.
G'day everybody, how you going? It is so very good to see you. Today, I want to give you, I'm not big on giving tips, but I actually think this is such a fundamental, epically massive tip that it's worth giving you. And I'm going to give you this one tip, and then you can go after that if you want, or I will explain why I think and why it's so important and my journey through exactly the same thing. So let's jump into this one critical, fundamental, most important, game-changing if you haven't done it. Like game-changing. This is not hyperbole. This is the real deal. I know there's 73 tips to this and 4 tips to that and 29 tips to this and all that other stuff. It's all good. Don't get me wrong, but this is the one. This is the one. If you haven't done this, you have to do it. Well, you don't have to. You don't have to do anything, but I think it will fundamentally change how you think. And it may well be why a lot of the conversations that we have in the online space are often at crossed purposes. And some of it might be, some of it, not all of it, but some of it might be literally the people that have done this versus the people that haven't done this. I think it's that profound and that important. All right, roll credits. My tip is the thing that's going to profoundly influence the way the grey matter works up here in photography is I think everybody needs to shoot on film for some amount of time in their photographic life. And here is why. Now, these things will seem very obvious as I go through them. And I might miss some, so let me know if I miss some. Love. The whole point of this online community is we can share and we can all get smarter together. Firstly, film. Film, by its very nature, is finite. And when I was out shooting images like this, I know it's a little bit overexposed, but when I was out shooting black and white images like this in the 90s, shooting film, same sort of thing in the 80s as well, I went out with a certain number of rolls of film in my pocket. This was in the late 80s. I had one roll of film. There was this magnificent foggy day and I had to be ridiculously sparing because once I ran out of frames, I couldn't capture any more gold. So looking at this roll of film, which I don't have with me here, so sadly, it's in lockdown in my warehouse and I can't get to it to show you. But I'd only had 7 shots left in my camera this particular day. And I made every single shot count because there was only 7. Now, if you have to make every single frame count because they're going to run out, well, you are going to do everything in your power to get to capture as much gold as you can. So you're not going to take 17 shots of the same thing. You're not going to bracket. You're not going to focus stack. You can't do any of this stuff. You have to make gold with one frame. This was 1989. I hadn't even started making money from photography yet. And I didn't carry a lot of film. It wasn't a business. It was just my joy in life. Fast forward a couple of years to this photograph here, known as Ghostram, one of my most popular images of all time. I've sold 12,000 posters of that one image and over 25,000 greeting cards of that one image, let alone all the hand-signed and hand-printed prints that I made. This is a ridiculously popular image. Moving forward 5 years to when this was taken, 1994, photography was my living at this point, and I would carry around with me something like 5 or 6 rolls of film, especially if I knew it was going to be great weather conditions. It's going to be fog. I love the fog. I love the atmosphere. I love the cinema. I love the drama of it all. So I was always standing by, and I used to buy my Ilford FP4 and HP5 in packs of 20. So I would always have 20 of the blue FP4 and the green HP5 on the shelf, and then I just basically stuffed it into my pockets and off I went. Still, 6 rolls of film 6 times 36, well, 6 threes are 18, that's 180, and 6 sixes are 36, so that means I had 216 frames. Now that seems like madness in today's world where some people might chew through 216 frames in the first 4 or 5 minutes or the first half an hour. Whereas back then, that was my entire capacity for that period of time. And I was usually shooting outside of opening hours of shops because it's early in the morning, and I could easily chew through my film before the photography stores opened at 10 a.m. So this was it. Again, you had to be extraordinarily careful with your exposure and extraordinarily careful with your framing. What am I actually doing? Because I know a lot of people like to crop. I've never been a cropper, and the main reason that I trained myself not to crop was, one, I love getting the frame in camera. That's really important to me. I just love it. And the other reason was 35mm film. FP4 was a 125 ISO. We also had another term back in the day called ASA, but I'll stick with ISO because we're in the digital era and that's what everybody knows. 125 ISO, but ISO, like 100 ISO today is very clean. Back then, 125 ISO film was not. It was still reasonably grainy, to be honest. So you couldn't enlarge. You couldn't enlarge very much without, basically losing quality, losing detail, and so on. So I just wanted to use the entirety of the negative. And I would often also be shooting with the HP5, which was 400, and it's starting to get visibly quite grainy. So when you're shooting film, you've got to be super careful with your exposure and super careful with your framing. You've got to get that framing right. And you don't have a lot of goes at it. As I managed to carry more film, I might have taken 2 or 3 copies of something that I liked, maybe. And I started to get a little bit into bracketing just because, again, we didn't have anywhere near the dynamic range that we have today. And it wasn't that I was stacking or anything, but it was just making sure that I'd got the right exposure, because I've always been super interested in shooting in high dynamic range environments, sun, shadow, everything in the same frame, mixing up the frame, having it all happening at once. And another reason that I took multiple frames had nothing to do with actually photographic technique or creating some other outcome. It was actually a ridiculously practical one. As my career moved on and I got towards the end of the 90s, and images like Ghostram, which I was hand printing in an enlarger, which means I was every month I would stick it in the enlarger, which has got this sort of tray that you'd stick it in, and you'd put it in, you'd expose it, and I might do 100 prints each time, and then I would get through those each month. The reason I actually took multiple shots as I got towards the end of the 90s was because I actually wanted multiple copies of the negative, because the negative was the original. It's the only one I had, and I was wearing my negatives out by using them so much in the enlarger. So it was actually to have multiple original copies of my photographs, because digital didn't exist. You couldn't just go copy and paste. It's just such a different world. So I wanted to have multiple originals. That's what film made us do. We had to be inventive. So that's reason number 1. Film was finite. And the reality is with digital, yes, it is finite. But guess what? It's almost infinite, because you can actually shoot and fill your card and have your 1,000 images. You can just have another card, which is tiny. Or even, and I've done this when I've completely filled the card and I don't have another one because I just thought I wouldn't get this many shots this morning. You can actually go back and delete. Now with film, you cannot reuse the film. With digital, you can delete the shots that you don't think are as strong, or maybe you were over bracketing and you don't, there's ways, right? So a completely different discipline. But then the single most fundamental reason about the difference between film and digital is this: the review, the capacity to review. In the digital age, we can literally just fire off a shot, whatever, like let alone the fact that it's almost endless. But you can go, oh, done, done. There it is. It's right there, it's done. Look how well I've done. Am I not a photo god? And you're told on the spot that you've succeeded, or you can see that you haven't. And can I just segue slightly into histograms? I was watching a video just this morning, someone talking about the absolute necessity of a histogram. I'm going to piss some people off here, perhaps a lot of people. I'll say this as gently as I can. I don't think the histogram should be your god. You should be able to see in today's world with an EVF and the back screen and so on. You can see where the bright areas are, and you can see where the dark areas are, and you can very quickly learn the dynamic range of your camera. I've never used a histogram ever. Never. You can just see it. I'd love for people who use histograms, and this is not an adversarial conversation. Maybe there's something that I'm missing here, but my whole life is photography. It's never caused me any problems. I understand my gear, I understand its tolerances. I also accept that if you shoot into the sun, it's going to be blown out if you're exposing for the mids or the shadow areas. Like, I don't need a histogram to tell me that. And if I'm exposing for the sun, then I know the shadow areas, they're going to be black. Again, I don't need a histogram to tell me that. Anyway, this is just a quick aside. So in the film days, unlike digital, we've just said you can review it, and you can review it up, down, oh, it's better, the framing, everything can be reviewed. Film. You get your settings right, you get your frame right, you believe the light meter in here is telling you what is correct, you shoot it, you're done. There is no review. So what film teaches you, what film gives you is this a confidence, and it gives you discipline. Two things which I think are pretty critical. You can completely overshoot a shot, maybe over focus stack, maybe overexpose, maybe, and when I say overexpose, too many exposures, maybe over bracket it, too much bracketing. In film, this wasn't a thing. You had to be confident of your frame, you had to be confident of your exposure, and sure, yes, you could still bracket, so you could have multiple exposures, and these cameras were set up that they would do one high, one low, too high, too low, whatever you like. I still didn't really do that much. I did it towards the end of my film era. That's an aside. But you had to be confident, you had to be sure, and you didn't get to review. There was no checking. You didn't get to be able to check. So again, this is an aside, but the whole 2 card slots thing, it's a bit like the screen thing. You know, these safety nets didn't exist, and we just got used to them. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have either in 2020. That's not what I'm saying. But I gently and warmly and respectfully ask for those that have never gone through this era to understand that people who have gone through this era, one, could never check their work. You're done. You're done, it's finished, you lock it up, you lock it off, and you have to move on. And you haven't reviewed it. You just know, you just have to know that you know what you're doing, and you have to be confident. I mean, can you imagine you're out there, there's the golden shot. You've got the best thing has ever happened in front of you. You've captured it. You know, I wonder if that would be highly anxiety inducing for someone who's only used to digital, to take 1 or 2 frames of something that's just the gold and then to move on. Well, that was our world, and that is how we've been trained, and that's why we have different tolerances to those who have only used digital. To shoot on film teaches you discipline, it teaches you confidence. You have to believe what you're doing, and you have to know what you're doing. Otherwise, it's a disaster. So I warmly and gently invite everybody, get yourself, borrow an old film camera. Everyone's probably got one in the cupboard somewhere. Dad's old camera, mum's old camera, auntie's old camera, who's ever. Get yourself some film and just have a crack at the discipline of one. You've got, 36 shots of 35mm film. That's it. That's all you've got. That's you could set this as a little project for yourself. You only take the 36 frames, and see how you go. You go out for a walk. So instead of you've got a memory card with up to 1,000 frames on it, you've got 36. And you've got to make them work. And the second thing is, you've got to have the confidence to do it because there's no screen on the back. That's my challenge to you. Give it a go. The reasons I don't enjoy and don't particularly want to shoot film anymore has nothing to do with either of those things. For me personally, it's got to do with the fact that I used to hand roll my own film, hand develop my own film, dry it, cut it, put it into the neg holders, and then I used to print all my own prints. And that was a massive process, and I spent from the very first time I was in a darkroom was 1985, and I didn't step out of a darkroom until about 2001. So 16 years of doing that stuff myself. I've had my time. I don't need to do it anymore. I've certainly learnt all those skills. I'm as happy as Larry. Plus there's other things like there's a lot, you get a lot of film and there's a lot of storage. Film wears out over time, it fades away over time. It doesn't have the same workflow. And I personally love the digital workflow, and I feel we have cameras that are just excellent today. And as I've said before in previous videos, from the D3 onwards, I think the Nikon cameras had a very film-like feel. We are going to have the Nikon D4 versus the Nikon F5 challenge. How awesome would that be? I think it'd be really interesting to see how the 16 megapixel D4 fares against, well, whatever film can give us. And I'm going to let someone else do the developing and the scanning in 2020. Just be really interesting to see the differences in quality and shooting styles and all that sort of stuff. To reiterate, the number one most important thing you could do as a photographer to improve your skills, your hit rate, your focus, your framing, all of that sort of stuff, the very best thing that you can do is go shoot some film for a little while. If you've never done it before, if you've done it before, absolutely not, irrelevant to you. But if you haven't, it's absolutely going to really help your thinking. And it'll probably, if you're not really sure on how exposure and aperture and ISO all work together, it would probably help with that as well, because it's uncompromisingly difficult to shoot manually if you don't get those things. Of course, you don't have to shoot manually. This camera has full auto settings. Never use them because I love shooting manual. Anyway, everybody, as always, I would love to hear what you think about this idea. If you've never photographed on film, do you think that might help you in the craft and the discipline of being a photographer? I'd love to know your thoughts around that. I'd love to know whether you have or have not ever done it. That would be super interesting to me because, of course, the first affordable digital cameras are now 16 years, 17, 18, 19 years old. And there's many thousands of people that watch this channel who I know are under the age of 35. So there's a very good chance they've never even touched film. Even people older may never have touched film. So I'd be super interested in what the mix is out there. So please let me know what you've done, what you haven't done, what you think, and we can explore this more. I think there's a whole subset of ideas around the discipline of what film gives to you. Anyway, my lockdown ends soon, maybe, although the government have recently said some people have been naughty and they might hold on to us a little bit longer. It's almost 3 months now. If you think I might be losing my mind, well, 3 months is a long time to not really be able to go anywhere and shoot at interesting locations. This is my heart, this is my life, is photographing the world, and I haven't been able to get to any, like not one. I'd happen to live where I live now, within 5 kilometers of where I live is none of the locations where I would like to photograph. It's quite bizarre. All right. Well, as usual, it is spectacular to see you. Even if it's in my mind's eye, I can imagine it. And if you're new here, well, I would very much like to welcome you to my channel. Thank you for being here. It is so lovely to meet you. subscribe, and then we can see each other again and shoot the breeze some more. Shoot the breeze. See, that was a photography joke right there. Oh, look, I'm a dad. It was a dad photography joke. Does it get worse? Hard to say. Please like, because that's fantastic for the channel. Please share. Does make us all smarter. And if you'd like to see over 200 videos right now, you can just look right down there. There's more of me. Can't get any better. All right. What do you think? See ya. Bit of D. A bit of D. I framed myself on the wrong side, didn't I, for holding a camera up here? But anyway.